Dear participants, a warm-hearted welcome to A Tree Awakening, today's online event that is intended to be a joyful and inspirational meeting with urban trees and forests. And we'll also meet with people who care about trees and who know what trees offer to us and how urban trees and forests support healthy, livable, and sustainable communities. My name is Elisabeth Pötzelsberger, and I'm Head of Resilience Program at EFI, the European Forest Institute, who is one of the organizers of this event. Today's event was envisioned and is organized through a partnership of EFUF, the European Forum on Urban Forests, EFI, and the Clearinghouse Project, a large EU-China research project coordinated by the European Forest Institute on urban forests that have the power to increase the resilience of cities under the challenges of global change. Today's event was also inspired by the fact that 3 cities, Ljubljana, Brussels, and Barcelona, had all become tree cities of the world in 2021. Knowing how many different perspectives these 3 tree cities offer, I'm very much looking forward to exploring the trees and forests in the virtual discovery walks, which we will all join a bit later today. We will access these tree discovery walks through the new My EFUF app that was launched at the Urban Forestry Days conference in March. Before that, we'll enjoy 4 notable speakers and also a panel of city experts who will share with us insights into the sometimes harsh life of trees and into opportunities and challenges of tree management in their respective cities. So next to getting inspiration, we'll also learn about the realities of a tree and a tree manager on the ground. And now, as the first important point on the agenda, let me now invite Chris Baines, an English naturalist and renowned environmental campaigner, for his inspirational welcome speech. And what remains for me is to wish you an exciting, insightful, and pleasant A Tree Awakening event. Chris, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Elisabeth, and good to see you. One of the wonders of Zoom is that here we are all over Europe talking to one another. I'm going to share my screen. I've been given an extremely intimidating title, and there's nothing really that I can tell this particular audience that they don't already know. But hopefully I can actually at least provide a kind of a role as a warm-up artist for the rest of the speakers. I'm just hoping that you can see that. I'm speaking to you from the heart of the wonderful urban forest of Wolverhampton, which is probably a place very few of you have been to. And really just all I can do is give you a reminder of a few things. For the first time in history, more than half the world's population lives in towns and cities. That's a first, and it's a really important first from our point of view. And just as that is happening, we're discovering that climate change is making those towns and cities ever more stressful, ever more difficult places to live in. But what we all know, and what we have a mission to communicate to others, is that actually trees and green space can actually make those towns and cities more livable. They can cool the air, they can reduce the risk of flooding, they can do all the things that you already know. And that's something which I think has been known for a very long time, really. Way back in medieval times, tree planting and shade were seen as a critical part of urban quality of life in the Mediterranean, for instance. And even now, in the most crowded places on Earth, you've got trees that manage to survive because people value them for their shade. So in one sense, there's nothing new about this. And in the context of the UK, certainly, the godfather of landscape architecture, a Scot called J.C. Loudon, was writing in 1829, as our towns and cities were industrializing, becoming more and more polluted, working conditions were getting worse and worse. He was writing that there was a need for breathing places in our towns and cities. That's a long time ago, nearly 200 years ago. And our response to that was Victorian parks. And most of the great towns and cities that we all know and love have at their heart those parks that were really a legacy that was invested in to provide the kinds of facilities that we're talking about today. But it's important to remember how different the world was 100, 150 years ago. This is one of the busiest streets in the centre of London at that time. And the striking thing is that it's very uncluttered and that the transport is very benign, really. It probably smelled rather bad, but actually horse-drawn transport was the key at that stage. If you compare that now with our streets and the pressures that they're under and the huge amount of infrastructure that they have to accommodate, our towns and cities have become very much more difficult places to establish big trees in. And we're the people who understand what a challenge that is. We know that if we're going to have those big trees in the future, we have to provide the space for their roots to grow. And that means we have to find quite new ways of working in partnership with a whole range of partners that we've perhaps not related to before. The engineers, the highway engineers, the service engineers, the transport engineers, all of these people have to become our creative partners if the trees of the future are going to actually survive and thrive and produce a similar legacy to the one that we've inherited. And this is just an example. This is a project I've been working on in central London. The housing in the background has all been built in the last 5 to 6 years on a demolished housing site. So buildings have been removed and replaced, and the trees in the foreground were planted in 1973. So in 50 years, they have grown to produce the kind of environmental benefits that we talk about and that we admire. But they've only survived because of the use of ground penetrating radar to find the services, for instance, and because of the collaboration between the landscape architects, the tree people, if you like, and the engineers and the developers. And I make the point because if you look very carefully, that little row of trees there is the biggest that the developers were able to buy. Those are big nursery trees. The comparison between that tree planting that we can do now and the legacy that we've inherited is just incomparable. And we're the people that have to communicate that relationship very much more effectively than we do. And while we're arguing those technical issues with those technologists and those fellow travelers in the engineering community, I hope that we don't forget that actually the reason we're doing this as much as anything is to give people that contact with nature. When I woke up this morning, before I even opened my eyes, I laid in bed and I knew that I was in the urban forest because I could hear the forest birds singing outside the window. So have a great session. You've got some wonderful speakers ahead of you. For the next 10 or 15 minutes, we're going to hear from 3 different cities talking about the way in which they actually value their trees and green space and the way in which they manage them. Thank you very much.
Think about a region of 600 square kilometres with 3 million inhabitants. Your mind will probably picture a dense metropolis with large urban areas and many economic activities. So this is the metropolitan area of Barcelona, the largest urban agglomeration of Western Mediterranean, which generates half of Catalonia's GDP. And yet, surprisingly, more than half of this area is formed by green spaces, the mountain ranges of Collserola, Ordal, Garraf and Marina, the Llobregat and Besòs rivers and basins, many beaches and multiple water streams. In addition, there are many urban green spaces, such as squares and parks. These interlinked natural spaces and rich landscapes of great environmental relevance form the so-called green infrastructure. There can be found more than 50 diverse habitats, home to over 5,300 different species. The green infrastructure provides ecosystem services, that is, a series of goods and services related to health, well-being, welfare and culture, as well as locally produced food and other products. As a whole, it shapes an important environmental and social network, intended to become one of the backbones of the metropolis. Consolidating the green infrastructure shall help to develop a new model of metropolitan environmental sustainability aimed at achieving the right balance between socio-economic development and existing environmental assets. Therefore, it is necessary to join efforts at all levels, from establishing a global strategy for the territory to defining each particular element of the green infrastructure. The final stretch of the Llobregat River is a key element of the green infrastructure. It holds high biodiversity values, is crucial for ecological connectivity and plays an important role for social purposes. In fact, the Llobregat River itself contains half of the habitats of the metropolis. Thus, its delta is one of the most important sectors of the metropolitan area in terms of biodiversity. The Llobregat River and its tributaries are essential for ecological connectivity, as long as they connect the hinterland with the coastline and Ordal Mountains with Collserola mountain range. Yet, this permeability is smaller than desired due to the numerous urbanized areas all around. It is worth to remind that, for decades, the river was a forgotten part of the territory. Luckily, today it has recovered its qualities for people's enjoyment and well-being. It is now connected to the other natural spaces such as metropolitan parks, mountain ranges and metropolitan beaches through a net of green paths and routes structuring the territory and the municipalities. Despite being intensely humanized, filled with communication infrastructures, industries and dense urban areas, the final stretch of the Llobregat River, which runs across 16 municipalities, is a 30-kilometre long ecological infrastructure, vital for the provision of ecosystem services. Now, one of the biggest challenges is to integrate and apply the ecosystem services in actual processes of planning, management, assessment, decision-making and environmental communication, among others. Co-governance is fundamental. All stakeholders should be included in public, private and social organisations should coordinate and engage for this common goal. It is important, though, to always consider the eventual climate scenarios. What future shall we expect from our territory? How will the increase of world temperature alter it? Which consequences will entail the decrease of water resources, the increase of flooding periods or the rising frequency of fires? How can we face the loss of biodiversity? The speed and intensity of the climate change impacts will determine to a large extent the way of managing our territory in order to respond to citizens' needs. The Barcelona Metropolitan Area is already working to face all these challenges and to boost the resilience of the metropolis. The green infrastructure will certainly help reduce risks and vulnerabilities, as it is a tool to make the territory more versatile towards the forthcoming reality.
Fantastic. Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name's John Parker. I'm Technical Director at the Arboricultural Association here in the UK. I hope you're all doing well and staying safe, and that you enjoyed those great videos from 3 tree cities of the world, or from Europe, I guess. Thank you so much to EFUF and to EFI for inviting me to chair this session of today's event, A Tree Awakening. I've got to say, EFUF is one of my absolute favourite tree groups and events anywhere in the world. It's great to be a part of today. If you haven't yet made it to an in-person, face-to-face EFUF event, then you really need to get yourself involved. You're about to hear from 3 wonderful speakers who will each have 10 minutes for their presentations, one after the other. And then at the end, we're going to have 10 minutes to work through as many of your questions as we can. So please submit your questions using the Q&A button. If it's directed at a particular speaker, then please state which speaker it is for. Okay, it's now my very great pleasure to welcome our first speaker, Thomas Randrup, from the Swedish University of Agricultural Sciences, where he's Professor in Urban Open Space Management. Thomas, over to you.
Are you ready? Okay, here we go then. Well, thank you very much, John, and thank you very much all your organizers for inviting me in here. And thank you, Chris, for this wonderful introduction. I think you said it all. You took the words out of my mouth there, but hopefully I can bring you some food for thought here. My presentation is called Nature-Based Thinking, and I've chosen to take a governance perspective to this. It's based on a recent paper which I developed together with Bosch from Wageningen University, and with Cecil, who you're going to meet in a little while here, and not least with Tom Wild from Sheffield University. There we are, the second one. I've already spent 2 minutes of my precious 10 minutes here, but this was a slide with the technical installations, claiming that it's not difficult to plant a tree. They just need room to grow. And we have this definition of nature-based thinking, being nature-based solutions in their own right, rather than mere technical installations, helping them to become both more resilient and sustainable. And this has now been adapted by the EU project Connexus, which is actually a sister project to one of the organizers here also today. The dilemma is that while we know and are aware about the contemporary societal challenges, and while we know that trees and green spaces are part of the solution to solve these challenges, then we still do not really seem to make the real drastic changes. And this call for transformative changes have been called upon by a number of international organizations and in many, many conventions lately, and you see some of them here on the slide. We do have a number of initiatives to change, including going back to the mid-80s, sustainability, which can be claimed to be a way of thinking, including both the social, ecological, and economic perspectives, to do all we do to ecosystem services, which is basically a systematization of nature's values for humans. And from a landscape perspective, importantly, also including the more softer and more intangible values, such as aesthetics and senses and recreation. And that has been a great value for the landscape industry to have the ecosystem service actually including these softer values in the same way as we are having the more hardcore production of trees and fish and CO2 sequestration, etc. Now also nature-based solutions have been introduced as a concept where we as humans should use nature actively. We should start to create solutions and be active by being inspired by nature. And lately, as you see in the top right corner, we have the nature's contributions to people, which have been presented by the IFPES as an evolution of the ecosystem service concept. Now also, or basically integrating the cultural perspectives into the material and immaterial values, recognizing the human perspectives in everything we do. And that is obviously all good, but we still tend to see nature as a good for humans. We have this strong anthropogenic perspective to these different kind of concepts. And do we actually see the needed changes? So if you want to change something or anything, you need to change the governance structures as stated by our colleague Bosch. And governance is about governing. It's about making decisions, steering, and in doing so, collaborating between both government and non-governmental actors. I go back again. A number of studies have shown the governance challenges to these changes. And I've listed some of them here, which is an extract for some of these reviews, claiming that we still, would say suffering, but we still have challenges such as unclear leadership and responsibilities within, for example, local government. We have a lack of institutional capacity, and we are probably lacking the needed expertise. We still are engaging different types of stakeholders, but it's difficult and it costs time and it's difficult to get the right representation, etc. We still lack evidence of what nature-based solutions or sustainable stormwater management solutions actually cost, and we are lacking evidence of their efficiency. We lack of identifiable environmental values related to these, softer values, you can say. We have lack of market incentives, space, knowledge, staff, and time, lack of awareness of the adaptability of these solutions, technologies, and policies, and lacking all this, we're also lacking clear standards, knowledge, and we need to do more research. Maybe not so surprising said by somebody like me coming from the university system, but I think that's a fact. And then we are putting in this engineering culture, which is may not be fair to the engineering profession, but this is actually coming out from some of the reviews focusing on sustainable stormwater management solutions, and it's actually focusing on the fact that we tend to do what we feel most safe about. And we are feeling safe about how much water can run in a pipe, but it's uncertain how much water can actually run in an open, daylighted, nature-based solution, being unpredictable. So that is still also some of the challenges that we're dealing with. Another perspective is the way that we tend to organize tree planting decisions systems. And this has a strong governance perspective too. The linear logic is dividing the tree planting process into separate products, which all have their own expertise, budget, stakeholder engagement processes, etc. And we call for a more holistic take on this, being inspired by nature actually. And we suggest that the process of tree planning, design, establishment, maintenance is seen in a more kind of cyclic process, never ending, constantly replanning, redesigning, reconstructing while maintaining. And obviously this requires multi and transdisciplinary approaches and a lot of cooperation. So nature is not just the icing of the cake being implemented when everything else is already in place. We need to see the governance structures and decision-making processes together with community engagement and the ecological perspective as a whole. And it should be a cyclic process rather than a number of individual products related to planning, design, construction, and long-term operational activities. So the time dimension is vital. A new green, blue solution should be based on long-term visions rather than exact products, allowing nature to prevail via its natural processes and unpredictability. And last, we see nature-based thinking as a perspective to working with people rather than for people. So you can rightly claim, do we need nature-based thinking as another fancy concept? We already have a number of solutions and good examples of how to use nature to address some of these contemporary challenges. And some of them are listed here, and we say, yes, maybe so. But if we look at the vertical gardens in Milan, we claim that these are technical nature examples of that. What happens if the irrigation systems break down? Or the roundabout being an example of instant nature, establishing a new blue-green solution in a previous roundabout in the center of Copenhagen, but basically established overnight. So what about the long-term maintenance perspectives when we are creating instant nature? In the Connexus project, we aim for development of nature-based thinking, trying to include a holistic and long-sighted perspective in 7 different life labs. And one of them is actually Barcelona. We will set up future workshops testing the transition from today into the unforeseen future. And I need to say that this work is led by Olivia Bina from University of Lisbon and Andy Ince from Sheffield University. So we will do these future workshops with the local stakeholders to see if we can qualify and further define what we are thinking about when we talk about nature-based thinking. And my last slide here is kind of a summary claiming that nature-based thinking is basically a mindset combining ecological, social, and institutional governance dimensions holistically. And it's a long-sighted cyclic process of constant planning, designing, construction, and maintenance with people, not just for people. So I hope this made a little bit of sense. And if not, I recommend that you explore more details in our paper and waiting for the next 3 or 4 years when we're working in the Connexus project. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Thomas. Please, everyone, keep your questions coming in. Right, now our next speaker, Simone Borelli, who is responsible for the Urban Forestry portfolio at the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. Simone, the digital stage is yours.
Thank you very much, John. Let me just see if I can get my presentation in the right format. Oops, there we go. Okay, can you see my screen?
Perfect.
Perfect, great. Thank you very much, John. So as Elisabeth mentioned earlier today at the beginning of the meeting, we're very happy to acknowledge that all the 3 cities organizing the meeting today, or at least involved in the meeting today, are proud members of the 3 Cities of the World program. So my purpose this morning is to tell you a little more about the program itself and to, of course, encourage other cities to join, let's say, the club of the 3 Cities of the World, which is, let's say, to our great satisfaction, progressively increasing. So how did this whole idea start? Essentially, as some of you might be aware, or hopefully most of you are aware, in 2018, we organized a World Forum on Urban Forest. In preparation for the forum, at the occasion of the International Day of Forest, we had a group of diverse people attending. We had Arbor Day Foundation at the time. There's actually the Deputy Mayor from Ljubljana, and Andrei, I think, is speaking later on, was there. Mayors from Lima, from Philadelphia, and colleagues from the Stefano Boeri Architetti. So basically, we were thinking of what kind of challenge can we put forward to make cities, let's say, more aware and more active in becoming greener places. And so this collective, let's say, effort actually came up with the idea of adapting the existing 3 City USA program to a more global scale. So as a result of this effort, we actually launched this idea at the World Forum on Urban Forests, and that's me, with Dan Lamb of Arbor Day. In the middle of it, there was the mayor of Mantova, who's proudly showing a gold medal he got from the President of the Republic as a token of his commitment to organize this meeting, but also towards urban forestry. I think there's a strong recognition that this is really an important step for many cities to take. Now, what is the scheme about? It's by no means intended to be a certification scheme. It's about recognition, it's about celebration, it's about awareness, and it's about inclusivity. So really, we want cities to take on this or become part of the scheme with this spirit. But nobody is certifying, nobody is judging them really. It's really about recognizing steps forward and efforts. Now, we have asked cities, of course, to join, and I'll talk about the 5 standards we have later on, but I'm very happy to say that in 2020, we had 120 cities that joined the scheme from different parts of the world, and currently from 23 countries. Of course, our aim is to cover as many cities and as many countries as possible, but we have to contain our ambition. We also asked cities to give a little bit of figures of what they have been doing over the last year, and basically the total amount of trees that these cities have declared is over 2 million trees have been planted in these cities. They had 600,000 hours of volunteer work, and $500 million was spent on tree care. And of course, we have the total people living in these cities as up to 83 million. So basically, our scheme is already covering 83 million people. So we are kind of proud of that, but of course, we hope to increase that over the next few years. Now, of course, as we saw the fantastic videos today, I'd just like to mention that we have small cities, we have large cities, but we have cities that have proved to be particularly inspirational. And I think the city of Brussels, the city of Ljubljana, and the city of Barcelona are really cities to which many others look to draw inspiration on how to move forward in their actions towards making their cities greener, healthier, and happier places. And I always like to put the accent on the happy part. To me, urban forestry is a lot about happiness. Trees make people happy. And in fact, I saw there was an interesting video at the World Urban Forum a couple of years ago in Malaysia. And one of the sentences of the theme song was, trees in the cities, people are happy. So I think that's a strong message for those who are planning cities on how to look at trees in a different way. Of course, we don't only have the large inspirational cities, we're slowly expanding into other areas of the world. Kampala was the first city in Africa to actually become a tree city of the world. And Hyderabad is very, very active, is the first city in India. And we hope others in those geographical areas will draw inspiration from them to consider becoming tree city of the world. Just to give you a few quotes from less known cities, Krasnoyarsk, for example, in Russia, states that they may be not the greenest or most tree abundant city of the world, but the city administration believes that trees play a great role in the life of a big city. So there was a strong message there. Camden Town. The Camden Council aims to create a resilient urban forest throughout the borough, seizing all opportunities to maintain and expand canopy cover. And of course, also look at biodiversity there. Las Rosas in Spain, with 50% of its territory protected, aims to be a Spanish reference in green environment and also wants to become a climate neutral city. So we also like to collect these different quotations to show how cities actually look at this scheme as an opportunity, but also as a container of what they're looking for in the future. Now, what do you have to do to become a tree city of the world? It's not complicated, but it actually seems simple, but maybe it's not so simple. First of all, you need to establish responsibility. So who's responsible for the trees in a city? And you'd be surprised at how many cities really have big confusion on different entities, different institutions, different people managing. So there's a strong need to have a clear responsibility for managing these resources, be it a single person, be it a committee, but there should be some way in which you can prove that your city has established clear responsibility. You need to set the rules. So what are the rules of engagement? I can tell you in Italy, only 50% of the cities have bylaws on how urban green space should be managed. So even, let's say, developed countries, let's say in brackets, of course, not all cities have rules to manage these resources. Now, what you have, this I think was one criteria that was missing in the original Tree City USA scheme, is really about having an inventory of your resources. Without an inventory, it's difficult to decide what to do with things. So we thought it would be, as a minimum, have at least a general inventory or some measure of the natural capital you have to manage. Allocate the resources. Of course, you need money to operate, and I think when I like to repeat this often, it's a matter of change in perspective. Urban green space, urban trees, urban forests should be viewed as an investment and not as a cost. Once that paradigm shift happens, the resources are much easier to identify and actually to allocate to urban green space. And finally, it's important to celebrate the achievements. So have an Arbor Day, a Tree Day, other events to really celebrate what is happening. These are essentially the 5 criteria we request cities to actually prove when they're applying for the scheme, and we review the applications to ensure that the information provided is correct. So once again, as I said, it's not a certification scheme, so we rely, of course, on the cities to provide reliable data to ensure that they're actually fulfilling the 5 criteria. Now, what's in it for the cities? The discussion around tree cities of the world helps build stronger ties to the neighborhoods and to the city, so people feel engaged and involved in taking action towards becoming a tree city of the world. The community is celebrated. It's really about working together. I think several others on the videos it was mentioned, the need for co-planning, co-management, co-design of these resources. Of course, there's a framework of action in this. So taking these or reaching these 5 standards, once again, seems fairly simple, but when you get down to actually doing it, it's not so obvious. Of course, there's a big component about education. There's a lot of work on city pride, really feeling that you are part of something. And of course, gain visibility, publicity. I checked the website for articles on Hyderabad in India, and there were dozens of articles about Hyderabad becoming the first tree city of the world and highlighting the efforts they've been making. So there's this. We are now working on, let's say, an evolution of this, seeing how we can also make technical resources available, promoting city-to-city exchange and so on. So we hope to be able to give more and more products and services to the cities that actually join the scheme. For those who might be interested, applications for recognition for 2021 will open in July this year. And on the website, you can find how to buy resources and really also some tools on how to make the case for recognition to your local administrators or policymakers or whoever makes the decisions in your city. I also like to invite you to the Tree Cities of the World virtual conference, which will happen on 27-28 July. We had around 700 participants last year. We think it's a really excellent showcase of what the different cities have been doing to actually meet the standards and take positive action. So thank you very much for your attention. And if you have any questions on the Tree Cities of the World scheme, I'll be happy to answer them. Thank you very much. Back to you, John.
Thank you very much, Simone. Brilliant. What is such a great project. Really good to hear more about that. Thank you. Okay, now last but certainly not least, I would like to hand over to our final speaker in the session, Cecil Konijnendijk, co-founder of the Nature-Based Solutions Institute and program director for the Master of Urban Forestry Leadership Program at University of British Columbia, Vancouver. Cecil, of course, had to have the longest biography for me to read, but it's all worth it because here he is. Cecil, over to you.
Thanks a lot, John. Thanks for that great introduction, and wonderful to say hi from one of those tree cities of the world, Barcelona. And I know there's some more qualified people to talk about Barcelona soon, but I just want to at least show you one of our wonderful urban forests called Corolla National Park or Regional Park behind me. So my my little talk today is about a new formula or a new guideline that I've been trying to promote and to introduce for greening our cities. And as we know, as we work with Tree Cities of the World and other initiatives, that policymakers, decision makers, those involved in governance, they often ask for some rules of thumb, for some principles or guidelines they can work with in greening their cities. And as those of us who are from academia originally, like myself, know, it's very difficult, of course, to boil down all this complex knowledge, all this complex information about trees and green spaces and what they can do for us, as well as all these different contexts in which we operate, into some simple guidelines or rules. But now that I've been in this field of urban forestry for quite some time, I felt it was actually time to try to do that. So I would like to present to you the 330-300 rule for greening and healthier cities. Excuse me. So, of course, we see some really interesting trends around us, and they're really impacting our lives in terms of climate change, in terms of issues like water scarcity, biodiversity loss, general health challenges, poverty, some really big things that are threatening, of course, our society and our world at large. And then on the other hand, we have had some very immediate challenges. COVID-19 is a very obvious example of that, but also things like extreme weather events that result from climate change. We see a lot of conflicts that can have to do with things like water scarcity. So the world is really a challenging place these days. But if you turn it around, and Thomas was already talking about nature-based thinking, we can also start trying to say, well, okay, we have these challenges, but actually these give us a great opportunity to really start doing things differently. For example, by greening our cities and making our cities closer to nature. And there are a few trends, I think, that we can capitalize on here there's a reappreciation of nearby nature in general. Of course, we know more about the role of green infrastructure, nature-based solutions in adapting cities to climate change. We see a general mainstreaming of urban nature, for example, to the nature-based solutions and also nature-based thinking discourses. And of course, also then on the other end, there's a need for good governance and leadership, as well as training and educating the people who have to take care of these urban green spaces and urban forests. So the European Union is one of the areas, I think, in the world that has really put greatest effort and emphasis on the role of nature in our cities. The nature-based solutions concept has become really well integrated in policy, as well as in research. So this recent publication showed that during the last 5 years of the European research program, almost 300 million euros went to specific projects on nature-based solutions. So there's a lot of interesting projects like U-Forest, which is an Erasmus Knowledge Alliance project, the Clearinghouse project that's co-hosting this event, that are really trying to build off that and try to come with even further innovations in terms of making our cities greener. So what do we do then in terms of formulas and guidelines? Well, those of us in urban forestry know, of course, that we have had those interesting guidelines that stick. So we have had the 10-20-30 rule introduced by Frank Santamore back in the 1990s in North America, basically stating that we need to ensure our diversity of tree species in cities. Things like not more than 10% should be one tree species, not more than 20% should be of any genus, and then not more than 30% of the trees in the city should be from one family. And although, of course, one can debate, again, what's the strength of this formula, it has really helped, I think, promote tree diversity in our cities. And it sticks, right? It's something that's really easy to remember. So that's when I came a few months ago to combine a few areas of research and some principles to come up with this 330-300 rule. And basically it says, if we want to successfully green our cities, make them healthier and greener, every resident should be able to see 3 trees, at least 3 trees from their window or the place they live. They should also have at least 30% canopy cover in their neighborhood. And finally, nobody living in a city should have more than 300 meters to the nearest public green space. And that can be a park, that can also be a linear green space where you have multiple opportunities to interact with nature. And I'll show you an example of that. So in the case of myself living here in Barcelona, in the Eixample area, I definitely can see more than 3 trees from my window. I have a pretty decent canopy cover in my street. And then if I walk about 300 meters, I come to the Passeig Sant Joan, which is a really nice transformed urban avenue that has become a linear park with a lot of different benefits. People are able to interact, they can sit, they can enjoy nature, they can play, they can exercise. But then there are all these different nature-based solutions as well, cooling, etc., as you can see on the picture on the right. So you will say, okay, great, 330-300, easy to remember, but where does this all come from? Well, first of all, we know from research that visible green space is really important for our mental health and well-being. So the fact that we can see green, we can see trees, actually improves our well-being, improves our performance, our concentration, allows us to have mini breaks. And recent research from different environments in North America, in this case, shows really the health impact of having this visible green space close to us. We also know that the 30% canopy is a very important cutoff point. Work by Professor Thomas Astle-Bird and colleagues in Australia is repeatedly showing that a 30% canopy in a neighborhood starts leading to general health benefits, but also very substantial impacts on, for example, mental health, less social isolation, because people are more inclined to go out and interact with their neighbors. If you look at climate change on the other end, 30% may even be a low target. We may even want to look at 40% canopy cover. And then in terms of the 300-meter rule, well, colleagues of Thomas and mine, when we were back in Copenhagen, they did some really interesting work on this, showing that if you live less than 300 meters from a nearby public green space, then you were, for example, much less likely to be obese, to be more physically active. And there's research that shows this impact all the time. The 300, maybe 400 meters is really an important threshold for people to use local green spaces. So what does it look like then in reality? Well, this is some work done on the left here by a Dutch consultancy advisory company called Humankind that shows how you can map visibility of green space. And of course, with Google Street View and other tools these days, we can actually do that. We can actually look at the green view that people have. There are opportunities there as well, of course, to to measure that by using, for example, GIS approaches. But of course, you can also use citizen science, right? You can ask people in a survey across your city, go up to your window, how many trees can you see? And that's actually what Greenpeace Spain did the other day. They did a social media campaign and they asked exactly that, showing that among 5,000 respondents, 74% could see at least 3 trees from their window, which was really hopeful, I think. The 30% canopy cover is often a tricky target. So this is work done by Cobra Groeninzicht, the Dutch consultancy company. They were really interested in this tree 3300 and they started measuring the canopy cover at neighborhood level in the Netherlands. And here you see the green areas in the center of the country. Those are the only urban neighborhoods that actually hit the 30% canopy. When you go to places like Amsterdam or Rotterdam, etc., you're in a much lower canopy rate. And then finally here, some evidence in terms of the 300-meter rule, so how far to the nearest park. So this is done by Mathilde van den Bosch and colleagues for WHO. And they show that for 3 selected cities, Malmö, Kaunas, and Utrecht, between 70 and 80% of the people actually had less than 300 meters to the nearest park. So these are tough standards. They're not the easiest, but on the other hand, it shows that these are not unrealistic either. So if we actually start realizing 300, we can really start making some significant improvements to our urban environments. And of course, here we have to realize that where we are in the world will make a big difference. The 2 cities I've spent a lot of my life, the recent years, Barcelona on the top and Vancouver in the bottom there. But another place I've been working a bit, Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, is of course a completely different story where you have a canopy cover of less than 1% right now. And of course, also here you have to be careful that we have actually sometimes met these targets, but then created some really lousy urban areas. For example, Amsterdam Zuidoost, or the Bijlmermeer, as we know it as well, was definitely not a successful urban development project, although it was very green, but people really had issues there with anonymous green space, with unsafety, and with marginalization. So we still have to think, of course, also very carefully about the way we do urban design and architecture. And just to show you that seeing trees from your window is not blue sky thinking, the city of Frederiksberg in Denmark actually has a policy, a tree policy, where they say that every citizen should see at least 1 tree from their window. So moving to the end here, I was a bit surprised, honestly, that 300 had so much impact. When I tweeted about it, I had almost 70,000 views. On Instagram, somebody shared this, what they call the 300 rule in urban planning. And more than 9,000 likes were put on that post. And then it turned out the other day, without me knowing basically, that Greenpeace Spain has included 300 in its new guidelines for city greening. And they had a protest the other day in Madrid where they actually started promoting 300 as well. So a lot of attention, a lot of interest, and the Ministerial Conference for the Protection of Forest in Europe asked me to speak about this as well, which shows me that you can do a lot of very interesting scientific work and academic work and very complex work, but sometimes the devil is really in the detail, right? Or maybe less in the detail. It's actually about the simplicity of the message. So packaging a complex message in simple guidelines can be preferable. So what can we do with this? Well, I think the 300 is one example of mainstreaming the role of nature. We can really use this, I think, to further promote and to provide guidance to our policymakers. And hopefully then all of us experts working in this field can work with cities, can work with interest groups and governments to make sure this rule is implemented in the correct way. And here, of course, and to echo the words of Thomas, we have to apply a nature-based thinking approach. It's not just about the numbers. The numbers are just a means of bringing nature back into our cities. So 300 is one way, and only one way, to get the message across. But I hope that people are willing to work with us as we implement this across the world. Thank you for your attention.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Cecil. Okay, we're running a little bit late. Blame it on bad chairing, not our presenters. If I could ask Thomas, Simone, and Cecil, you're already on camera, but just to pop back. What I'm going to do is, there's one question here I really like. I'm going to ask one question. I'll come to each of you in the order in which you spoke. And then maybe if you could try and answer within sort of a minute or so, and we'll then move on to a little break. So the question is from Maggie. And Maggie asks, with the understanding that we need to plant a very large number of trees, not just a few street trees, what are the most urgent and important actions for urban tree planting in order to achieve carbon targets quickly? So what would you say, I'll give you sort of a minute or so to answer, are the most urgent and important actions that we can take for urban tree planting? Thomas, you spoke first, so I'm going to come to you first. Any thoughts?
Prioritization, obviously, you know, what Cecil has just shown us is just imminent, you know, clear message, and then go to the decision makers for prioritization. We need room for trees to grow. We know what it takes. And I think adding the perspective I presented is really trying to be low key, being inspired by nature. Don't make it too complicated to make it long-term sustainable. But the political prioritization is obviously key. I think Simone had some really good points also in your perspectives, in your 5 points there. Don't make it too complicated either. I think that's also kind of data-based. Don't make it too complicated. We have the arguments. Cecil has a good summer rules also. So it's a political prioritization now, and we have the arguments. We need to push it. We are the ambassadors.
Thank you, Thomas. Simone.
Yes, I think Thomas already quoted me, so that's okay.
I'm sorry.
No, I think I fully agree. It's really a matter of keeping the messages simple, and I really like Cecil's 330-300 message, which is a simple and clear message. And I think what I mentioned already in my presentation is really very important, that the message comes through that this is not a cost. It's an investment. It's an investment in the future. It's an investment in saving future costs, the cost of you know, air pollution, the cost of a health bill, it's the cost of infrastructure that you can save by using trees and so on, nature-based solutions. So it's really about changing the attitude, changing the mentality, and saying, no, we're not planting trees because they look nice. We're going to plant trees because that's our future, and that's why we want to have, you know, a better environment and a better lifestyle, because it's really, you know, what we're going to leave to our children. So let's keep a simple message and, you know, not make it overcomplicated.
Absolutely.
Back to you, John.
Thank you very much. And finally, Cecil.
I think a lot of wise things have already been said by my distinguished colleagues, but I think one thing we should always keep in mind as well, that tree planting is great, but tree conservation, right, is even better. So I think a lot of the things I've seen in Vancouver, for example, where a lot of big trees were lost because of development on private land, and to get those canopies and ecosystem services back, you need to plant a lot of trees and wait a lot of time. So I think that's one, and I think a second is also to be very aware of climate change when we establish trees. So Thomas already mentioned, of course, things like space, soil volume, etc. But as an addition to that, I think be very sensitive about what your urban forest is going to look like 50 years, 100 years down the line. Vancouver, again, did a really interesting strategy there, scoping out the urban forest of the future in terms of tree species that will work. In California, they've done some really interesting work doing climate matching between cities, saying, well, okay, San Francisco will actually have the same climate of San Diego 50 years from now. So look at the trees that San Diego has and how are they doing? Right, so we have to be really clever, I think, in building that knowledge base. And as we do that, then we can use those simple formulas like 330-300 to drive through those messages. But of course, behind that, there should be a very complex understanding of how to make trees grow. And as Thomas said, where we can keep things simple, really what we can.
Brilliant, thank you. So there you go. I think there's some great answers to that question there. Not that I've really got anything to add to our distinguished panel, but I just say that as well as planting, it's about the establishment we're trying to get across here in the UK too. It doesn't matter how many trees you chuck in the ground. If you're not looking after them properly, they're never going to get to maturity to do all the things we want to do. So we try and fit the word establishment after planting whenever we can. Okay, look, we are running late, like I say, again, my fault, sorry. So I will say thank you very much to Thomas, Simone and Cecil. Thank you to all of you for watching. We're going to have a short comfort break now. We'd ask you all to be back promptly by 11:45 Central European time. If you're in the UK, don't come back at 11:45. You'll have missed loads of good stuff. So that is in, where are we? 9 minutes. So see you shortly. Thank you to all of you. Thank you to our panel. Goodbye.